Dear friends, welcome to Andy's Licorice Talk. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also to like our Facebook page. This marks our 21st episode and an extremely special one. We're going to interview super legend, as we dubbed him in his own interview, Stanley Drucker, and we will start, of course, with the one and only John Corigliano. My connection with John is that I actually studied his iconic clarinet concerto with him in 1998 and then performed it in 1999. And we're going to talk about it. And this will be a tremendously historical interview. So I'm really looking forward to it. So without further ado, our wonderful guest, John Corigliano. Please join us, John.
Hi, Andy. Good to see you.
John, so great to see you again. Well, everyone knows about your clarinet concerto by now, especially this audience, but I would like to point out three facts very quickly that that some people might not know. The first fact is there's a new revised edition of John's clarinet concerto. When I played it for him, he was giving me all kinds of tips, and he was saying, well, when you work with the conductor, watch this cue and this, and he's rearranged it to make it more user-friendly, it seems. So please, anyone planning on performing this work, get the new edition. Very, very important fact. Another fact, which is not as new, but some people might not know, is that David Schifrin actually had commissioned the second movement, an elegy to John's father, for clarinet and string quartet. So there is a version out there. And along with David Schifrin, Stanley Drucker, our guest later on, has a recording of it. And thirdly, which I brought all the props today, John. When I asked him about the recordings, of course, there was a very famous 77 recording with Maida. But John says, if you really want to hear the essence in the beginning, there's this collection with Leonard Bernstein himself, the commissioner of the work, and all the radio broadcasts and a live performance with Stanley that John is particularly thrilled with. So anything you want to add to those facts or talk about, or shall we move on?
Well, a couple of things.
Sure.
The revised edition was published in 2015, and it also has a piano reduction and solo part, and they're all engraved now instead of hand copied. So that's great. And as far as the, what did you just say to me?
The quintet version?
Yeah, the quintet version has been recorded several times. And the last thing you said.
The last thing is this recording.
Right. That is an incredible recording of the world premiere of the concerto. Stanley and Lenny, I mean, a team that you just can't beat, and the Philharmonic working with them. There is nothing better than that recording. That is the ultimate recording, and you may be able to get it. I don't really know how you can get it without buying the whole set, but there must be a way. It's really worth hearing. It's just mind-blowing.
I would like to add, these are the exact words that John said to me in 1998. So I didn't even think about it. I bought the whole set, and it was worth every penny of it. So thank you, John, for the recommendation. Thank you, Stanley, for playing such a wonderful performance for us. Great. Now let's just keep on going with along these lines. If you had the picture perfect performance, let's take the one we just described. What is some one-word adjectives that you would use to describe the concerto when executed just the way you like it? What are some one-word adjectives that you would use?
Explosive, maybe. At the end, it's everything is going around you. The audience is sitting there, and around them 5 French horns, and above them in the back are 2 trumpets, and in the highest theater in the backs, left and right, there are clarinets and the full orchestra playing, and Stanley wailing on a high note, and it is explosive. I think it's really a piece that I wrote for 3 reasons. It was my first commission with the New York Philharmonic, and I was awed by that because my father was the concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic ever since I was a little boy, right up to through the Bernstein years. And I knew all the members of the orchestra and knew them socially, in fact, because we went to Europe together, to the Edinburgh Festival, and I wanted everybody to play in the orchestra. So it's a big concerto. It has 108 players doing it. It's constructed to honor three people. First one movement is for Stanley, and it's called cadenzas, and you can imagine what that entails. And there were accompanied cadenzas with very interesting cueing, which is much better in the revised version. Two cadenzas, a soft one in the beginning, an interlude that gets louder and louder, and then a very wild one as the second one. The second movement is an elegy to my father, who died in 1975 on his 71st birthday. And so I was writing this concerto, and of course, I always saw him in the concertmaster seat. So I wanted to write an elegy to him that basically honored him and was very slow and sad. And then at its highest point, the solo violin concertmaster plays along with a solo clarinet. This was very important to me. I think I worked on that first, before I wrote anything else, the idea that the concertmaster would be speaking with the soloist to the orchestra and audience. So after that, the third movement is all about Lenny and his theatricality and magnificent energy. And so I used 5 French horns that were not playing through the rest of the piece, and I put them around the back of the audience in the first boxes, say. And then above them in the center, in the back, I put 2 trumpets on the very top of the back of the hall, 1 clarinet on one side, 1 on the other. And the piece is titled Antiphonal Toccata. Antiphonal music is music that started way back in the Baroque with Gabrielli writing his famous sonata piano e forte. And it's the first time that the dynamics ever put in a score, piano and F, nothing in between, but at least that started the idea of dynamics. And he was a very important composer and had, in St. Mark's Cathedral, he had a choir on one side and a choir on the other, and he would go back and forth and then mix them together. And so the whole point of this is the idea of honoring the history of this wonderful antiphonal music, starting with the stage, with the soloist and the orchestra, and then expanding around it. And of course, the end is extremely theatrical and quotes to Gabrielli in the brass section, while around them trumpeting horns and trumpets are going wild. And of course, the soloist is up on the highest note you can imagine, trilling away, and it is explosive in the end. It really is. And so I really felt, by honoring the 3 important people to me concerning this commission, I was doing something that gave me great pleasure and a great honor.
Wow. Really thorough explanation, and I'm sure it'll give a lot of future performers and audience insight. I would like to, as someone who's performed the work and worked with you, a few observations that I am very curious about. One thing I wanted to speak to was the what you just said, the instruments around the balcony. I remember in an interview when I did it here, you said it was also, it served the purpose of giving a surround sound, like a movie theater feeling. So at that time, people were getting into CDs and stuff. You wanted to give them a reason to come to the concert hall and keep coming to live performances. And I think that's...
Yeah, I've written several pieces that involve spatial relationships in a big concert hall, because at that particular time, hi-fi was magnificent. And you got great stereo and 2 speakers. And, you know, you could play an orchestra and it sounded magnificent. And I said, yes, but what about the concert hall, the live experience? What makes it even more special? And the whole idea was, there you are in a huge hall that holds almost 3,000 people. And people are around you, all around you, and yet you just always hear the music from the stage. What if we expand that? I did that in my Pied Piper Fantasy for James Galway, where I had kids in the audience and people coming on stage. I did that with several pieces, but this was my first real effort in that. And it was partly, yes, to make the concert hall special again, when stereo hi-fis were so magnificent. I said, no, but they're not as good. And you can see why as the concert hall.
Beautiful. And there's one more special characteristic about the piece that really is noteworthy, and I'm very curious about your experiences with it, because this was written for an orchestra where you actually knew many people throughout the orchestra in specific in various seats. You actually write little solos for tutti string players. So I personally remember the very first rehearsal, and all of a sudden I thought they just turned white. They didn't. First of all, they didn't really believe it was a solo. You know, the conductor, well, how come you're not playing? And you mean just me? And he's doing the right. So I two questions is one, you've obviously thank goodness this piece has been widely performed and you've attended and participated in many performances. My first question is, have you also seen that experience? But my second question is, I'm very curious about the very first performance. Did you actually signal to these friends of the family that they would have something exposed, and or was it a surprise? What was the reaction?
Oh, well, it actually was not a surprise, because in the first rehearsal, which we had, I believe, on a Monday with a Tuesday night concert, Lenny spoke to the orchestra, and Stanley and I were waiting for 50 minutes before starting to play a note. During that time, he explained all of these things. They don't just randomly play. What happens is, like from the back stands of the second violins, if they're on the right side of the conductor, a note will start and then pass through the next stand, the next stand, the next stand, the next stand, then over to the first and back to the last stand there. So everybody has to play a solo, but they're cued. But Lenny was explaining to them that they're going to be asked to do new things with new notations, and that this was not just for effect, this was for musical reasons. And so what he did was, in that 50 minutes, he got the New York Philharmonic to understand that this piece really was a piece of music to be treated that way. And the minute he started, they jumped in with the greatness that they are and performed it that way. I mean, it was a tour de force, because I didn't know, we had such little rehearsal time. I didn't really know what was going to happen in 50 minutes. You know, I was standing there and thinking, I need a stretcher and take me to the hospital, because I haven't heard a note of this piece. But actually, he was right. He did the right thing. He got the complete cooperation of the orchestra. They dove in and did it. And of course, once it was done, then other orchestras understood and did it. It's like the first run of the clarinet concerto. I don't know how many notes it is, but Stanley must know. It's over 130, I think, in the first breath. And it's extremely difficult to do that pianissimo coming from niente and staying that soft. And what happened was Stanley did it. And after that, all the clarinetists said, well, this is a piece that only Stanley can do. You know, this is his piece, because it's not made for people like us. And then what started to happen is what happened, for example, in running when the 4-minute mile was reached. Somebody said, I'm going to try to do 4 minutes, and I'm going to do 3 minutes and 38 seconds. And before you know it, they broke the 4-minute mile because they wanted to. And now, when I go to a university very often to talk, all of a sudden I'm walking down a hallway and some kid with a clarinet jumps out and says, Mr. Corigliano, and he goes, and plays the whole thing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's become like that, which is wonderful. It's just wonderful. Yeah. So yes, these boundaries can be broken. All through music, composers broke boundaries. Beethoven certainly did, and reached for other things. And then the artists took them and went even further, which is what, of course, Stanley did.
Well, I mean, it's funny because you were talking about how nervous you were during the 55-minute talk, but it's not like Stanley Drucker had something on the very first rehearsal. No one's ever heard it before. Has something very challenging to play while he's waiting 55 minutes, and he just picks it up and goes. I mean,
you should ask him about it. It was quite something. You know, when I first showed Stanley the score, especially the first movement, which is all about cueing the orchestra and him just playing. And he's used to seeing things in measures, and they weren't. And his eyes just grew really big. And he said, oh my God. And he was worried until he learned it. And felt comfortable. And all of a sudden he understood that this was really freeing him to do what he wanted to do. And he jumped in. And of course, Stanley is Stanley, and he's super prepared, as he always is. I remember going to a concert up in Long Island with Stanley and his wife, Naomi. And I arrived there a little before, and he was in a full dress suit practicing. And I thought, that's Stanley.
Yeah.
He just loves music so much and wants to do it so well that he will be there at a little concert in a church or something, and he will be super prepared because that's what he does, and he loves music. So I'm very. This was a great experience for me. One of the great experiences of my life was this.
Right. Right. And actually, to put it very bluntly from this end, as a clarinetist, from what you were saying, it's not just one of our staples of our repertoire. It is a rite of passage. And when I lobbied for a long time to play this, of course, this is over 20 years ago, but I viewed it that way. Not only was it an extremely effective piece, but I thought, wow, when I first heard it as a kid, when Stanley did it, it's like, oh, only Stanley could do it, as you said. And then sort of 10 years into a job, I said, I'd like to give it a crack. And you agreed with me on this. The only way to really get it to that level is to set up a date. It's very difficult to just, okay, let's work it out. Isn't that cute? And then, I've talked to Stanley about this before. He says, if you want a test of nerves, that beginning, that, and it doesn't, in the practice room is very difficult, but when everything's silent and everyone's there and you start out, it's a real test of metal, as he says. So
Stanley called it the Everest of clarinet concertos.
Yeah.
Which made me very proud.
Yes. Now, how did that commission come about, and how much input in the actual composition did either Stanley or Lenny or anyone have? Did they just say, do what you want and send us the score afterwards, or did you actually call them up, or did they request anything? How did that all work?
Well, the commission came about because Stanley was going to play a concerto with the Philharmonic, and there was a commissioning thing that basically he was allowed to commission a piece, and he wanted Lenny to do the piece. Of course, who wouldn't? And Lenny was busy at that time and couldn't do it, and he actually mentioned me. And so Stanley knew me because I took 2 clarinet lessons from him, and I was always backstage, and seeing him, and he listened to a little of my music, and he said, okay, you can do it, and I did. Lenny, I didn't talk over some of the conducting things with Lenny because Lenny was all over the world, What I did was there was a conductor named Christopher Keene, who was the conductor in Syracuse, and he was a conductor of the New York City Opera way back. And I asked him about how to do cueing. And he had this method with alphabetical letters and numbers next to it. And I did that. But I found after the first performance and performances, that's really very difficult to do. And I had developed another simpler way of cueing. So I replaced it with that, and that's why there's a revised edition. But in the original, I didn't speak to Lenny. I spoke to Stanley a bit. But the first thing I did before anything else was to write the slow movement, because I knew my father had to be involved as the violinist, which is not necessary really to speak to a clarinetist about. It's just you have to write very lyrical long lines, and they're high too, and they have to be soft. But Stanley did that. I had no problem. And then when I got to some of the other passages, I believe I contacted him. Now, I've got a very bad memory, but Stanley can let you know that. I know that I brought the first movement to him, and that was quite an occasion. His eyes bugged out. And yet, as I say, Stanley mastered it and then loved it.
Wow. What I would like to know, what I recall from our session together, I was fascinated because you also, yes, full kudos to Stanley Drucker. We all know about Stanley Drucker. Of course, he's prepared and all that. But I was amazed. The impression I got from you was when you were asked to do this, you did your own preparation. It seems like you started really thoroughly studying our repertoire. And this is my impression. You correct me when I'm wrong. and started studying clarinet playing, because I remember there were things you would talk about, glisses going down, and say, well, I've heard jazz players do those intervals. I know they can be done. And then I remember we were even talking about Weber concertos. We were talking about it seemed as though pushing the clarinet to its, like, you actually gave me an incredibly inspiring talk about in your hands. You have an instrument that can, to this day, I still get chills thinking about it. You felt the clarinet was like a powerful instrument, and you were going to show parts of it that have perhaps never been seen before in one setting. But I'm curious, and some other viewers are curious. What do you make of our repertoire? What are some of the some things that kind of blew you away when you were looking at it, and other things that you were a little bit disappointed, even in the standard repertoire? It's okay. Most of them aren't with us anymore, so I don't think anyone's going to get mad at you. But I'm really curious what you think.
I love the great pieces, the masterworks, and I've listened to other things, but actually it was the clarinet itself. The versatility of dynamics, for example. There's no other woodwind that can play everything as tiny and soft and distant, and then suddenly be giant and actually match a whole orchestra. I mean, there's nothing like that, excepting a brass player, but then they can't do the things the clarinet can do in terms of versatility. So in many ways, of the non-bowed instruments, it's the most versatile, and it has, to me, the most beautiful sound. I know Mozart didn't like the flute. I like the flute, but when I wrote a flute concerto, I actually wrote it based upon a legend, the Pied Piper fantasy, because I wrote it for James Galway, and I knew him personally, and he was a Pied Piper kind of person. He would be this leprechaun who would, be buying tons and tons of videotapes and renting them and coming out with 10 of them. The next day he would do another one. He lived up in my country, near my country house. And I just thought of him as the Pied Piper, and I knew he played the tin whistle. And then that became a different kind of challenge. With the clarinet concerto, it became two things. What is a clarinet, and what can it do? And who am I writing it for? What are the goals of writing this piece specifically for the New York Philharmonic, for Leonard Bernstein, and for Stanley Drucker? That's a big thing. That's what made this piece what it was. If I hadn't written it for the Philharmonic, it would be a completely different piece, because I wouldn't have involved the entire orchestra, and therefore I wouldn't have removed certain players at the last movement. And if Stanley was not playing, I would not have felt the titanic quality of the clarinet, which he embodied, including the gentle and loving. But I mean, he could just play down an orchestra by his mightiness. And I love that. I just thought that was so amazing. And so it's my main inspiration, really, from those things, and in the repertoire, of course. But I thought it could even be more. It could be bigger, or high register, even softer. I mean, he comes in a high concert A up there, pianissimo, from niente to pianissimo. And, that's very special. I had to know it was possible. And once I knew it was possible, I knew he could do it.
Great. You've almost answered the next question. This is great. These are the easiest interviews I've ever had to do, because I had 10 questions, and the first one, about 3 or 4 covered. The second one is fantastic. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Having now studied the clarinet, you're actually, in a way, you could say, involved now in the history of the clarinet. I mean, honestly, I'm not exaggerating. So if you had to come up with some one-word adjectives, someone said, oh, so what's the clarinet like? What can it do? It's just a couple of one-word adjectives to describe the clarinet. And if you had having now studied the repertoire, having studied the possibilities, having worked so much with clarinet players, if you had a student, you probably have a conducting student, a composition student, who said, I want to write for the clarinet. What are things that I should, watch out for, good and bad? Stay away from this. Feel free to go in this direction. What advice will you give? It's a 2-part question. I want to go right back to the adjectives, because I can tell you're thinking about it.
My advice always, writing for an instrument, is listen to the repertoire and the playing. Get it in your ear, because that's where all things have to come from. So I would tell one of my students who want to write a clarinet piece, hear the repertoire and also hear it getting that sound and what it can do in your ears. I think once you do that, you can write for it, because the thing about it, as I said, it's capable of so many things, so many kinds of sounds at different dynamics and ranges and leaps, which it does effortlessly, that you really have to hear the repertoire to know that those things are not only possible, but they're idiomatic, because the clarinet has almost the best set of techniques of anything. I'm thinking, only say maybe a violin perhaps might have more different kinds of sounds it makes and things like that, but a string instrument, but nothing else in the woodwinds or brass. So it's a very unique instrument that is all encompassing. And I guess that's what you asked for a word, all
Yes.
encompassing, all encompassing.
Wow.
That's what a clarinet is. And that's what I love about it. It's just so good.
I have really bad news for you, John. I mean, you won a lot of clarinet friends and audience friends when you wrote the piece, but I think right now you've won a whole new set of friends that are watching. So thanks for that. That's really terrific. We're gonna ask one last question, not really directed, not directed at clarinet. We're gonna take a very quick break, and then we're gonna have super legend Mr. Drucker join us. But I'm curious. I mean, you had an extremely successful Academy Award-winning experience with the Red Violin. You've written for Altered States, but of course you've written concertos and symphonies and whatnot. What's the difference? How is it different when someone commissions you for one rather than the other, like a movie versus concert stage? How do you?
Yeah, it's totally different. You have to understand in a movie that there are three basic kinds of relationships composers have with, say, the people who play it. When you write for the symphony, concerto, symphony, whatever, your ideas are paramount. The conductor, the soloist, everybody tries to do what you put down. When you write for the opera house, that's sort of the case, excepting that because of the theatrical element, the director, the music director and a stage director and everybody else and the divas have something to say about what you do, that this is not going to work. Or they never say that in an orchestra. They try to make it work. But in opera, they not necessarily. They say, no, this doesn't work for us, and we're going to cut this, and it's not the same. Then you go to movies, and it's the extreme of that. You basically are an employee. And if you don't know that, and I think Schoenberg had some very unhappy moments with film people when he decided to say that he wants not only his music to play the way he wants it, but he wants script rights and all sorts of things. Or Ravel, when he was asked to write a movie, and they said they needed it in 3 months. He said, I can give it to you in 2 years. It's different. You have to write fast. You have to write to please the director, or it gets cut or changed. Stanley Kubrick, 3 whole scores were written to 2001, what was it called?
Space Odyssey,
Space, yeah, 2000 and something, with all the musics from the Strauss waltzes and Penderecki, all recordings that he put back of it. And 3 different composers wrote whole scores that were thrown out. Luckily, in Altered States, I had a director, Ken Russell, who was incredibly well-versed in terms of symphonic music. He knew more about Russian symphonies than I ever will. And so he was letting me go wild on Altered States, which never happens in Hollywood. It happened in that movie. And then Francois Girard, who wrote the Red Violin, who had a very good ear. He's now directing at the Met. He had a very good ear for music and played the piano and did those 32 films of Glenn Gould or something. He was really knowledgeable. So when I told him why I was going to organize the piece the way it was, he let me do it. He didn't censor me. Now, those are very important things, but it's very different being that kind of composer and then being given a blank piece of paper and saying, we need 30 minutes of what you have to come up with. That's really hard. And a concerto is something I feel because every year my father would play a concerto with the Philharmonic. So I would hear him practicing it at home, then practicing with the pianist. Then I would go to the rehearsals and hear with the orchestra. And then I was so nervous because I knew the pieces so well at 7 and 8 years old that I would sit in the green room backstage and listen to him play on the speakers. I couldn't sit in the concert hall because I knew every difficult passage coming up. And I would hunch over for the difficult passage and then rise when he accomplished it. You know, it was that kind of childhood. So the drama of concertos comes very naturally to me. I grew up with it. And so the idea of this single force and this whole orchestra and pitting them against each other and with each other, and it's something I breathe, which I think I'm very lucky to have had that. I've written like 9 concertos now of different kinds, and I do love that. I just finished a saxophone concerto, and again, it's always about something. This is called triathlon, 3 huge tasks. And the first is for soprano saxophone, and it's called Leaps. And it's wildly leapy and wild. And the second is called for alto saxophone, and it's called Lines, long, lyrical, beautiful lines. The third movement is for baritone sax, and it's called Licks. And it's, again, a very virtuosic, wild movement. But the whole concept had to come to me before I wrote it, just like it came with this concerto because of the orchestra, conductor, and soloist. I needed those things to really flesh out what I was going to do in this piece.
Great. As you know, I'm planning on playing this again and working it up, and we're quite friendly with Tim McAllister, the saxophonist, who you wrote the work. So we're wishing each other luck as we're both woodshedding your difficulties. So we're all looking forward to that premiere.
Unfortunately, it's happening mid-January, and I'm not really sure that's going to happen because it's too close.
Patience. We'll get there.
I have to get there. That's the only problem.
Anyway, fingers crossed for that. So this is really fascinating so far. And now, with your permission, John, we're going to get an old friend of yours on here by the name of Stanley Drucker. Stanley, please join us. Hey, Stanley, how are you, man?
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
Hi, Stanley.
I hope you approve, John, but we've had so many really fine clarinets, by the way, many of whom have played the Corigliano with you, but some of them, retired for 10, 20 years, and we called them legends, and I was incredibly embarrassed to call this man a legend, so we've officially dubbed him the one and only super legend. Okay?
He is that.
So, and so you wear it very well, Stanley. So, welcome. Before we do anything, I want you to describe the clarinet concerto with 1 or 2 adjectives.
Well, one certainly would be looks impossible.
Yeah, but you proved yourself wrong on that one, didn't you?
Often wrong, like he's often wrong.
But how about the effects? Any just impression? If you just had to leave after the concert, how would you describe the work itself?
Well, it's an entire world in this piece. So it has so many facets that add something to the whole of it, and the scary part is that you really have to know what everybody is doing. You just can't play it as a monolith. It's got so many interesting places that you have to try to flesh out.
Right. Well, I'm very curious because this elegy is such a, I can't think of the word, but it's a force. I mean, you yourself have now recorded the version with clarinet and string quartet. Others have done that. It's to John's father who had just died. But you must have known John's father quite well, and not just worked with him. I mean, you must have known him well. You know,
Of course, he was concertmaster when I became a new member in 1948, and he was a bigger than life guy. You know, he was. For me, it was absolutely the same as Heifetz. He was just incredible.
wow.
His solos were very memorable, and his playing was just super.
Wow. So there's an elegy again right there, John. A wonderful memory. But what I'd like to know is when you were playing that second movement, were you thinking in theory sort of what if I lost someone close to me, or were there actually elements in the piece that reminded you of John's father, and you played it a certain way, custom made, so to speak?
Absolutely. You know, that elegy was very moving, and it had such beauty and emotion. It was the perfect antidote to the first movement, you know, easily, and it just was hanging on air. It was just amazing stuff.
So I'm very curious. We had talked briefly about the evolution of the preparation of the piece. Not you. Actually, we can talk about that. But you mentioned going to Bernstein's house. Was it with John and having piano run throughs? I mean, how did that all come? People want to know about this.
Well, it's like the general staff getting together to battle. You know, and so we went. There were a bunch of us there. You know, of course, Lenny's apartment with studio at the Dakota, famous building. You know, the one with the 4 feet thick walls. You know, a lot of famous people lived there. Yeah. Lauren Bacall and probably a lot of others. One of the Beatles also was a set.
John Lennon, was shot there.
Of course, a lot of his team was there. I came with the Philharmonic pianist Harriet Wingren, and there was let's see, there were of course Johnny and others, and we sort of try to play through sections of the piece. I remember one place where Lenny said to John, he says, "That sounds like something I wrote." and we had, it was already bare bones because there was no piano reduction and there was no score. There was a score, but there was no reduction, and there was no real understanding of what was going on. But I think we got a lot out of it from a philosophical part, where one could flesh out certain meanings or certain sections. The scary thing, of course, originally was there were no bar lines, of course, first movement, but there were a lot of hints for the conductor to bring in certain sections or make certain events rise. It was very. And Lenny said, now that you've been stoking my memory, he said to John, he says, "Johnny, you've written a test piece for conductor."
Yes, I remember.
And I'm sure you had a lot of sympathy, Stanley. I mean, you just sat there doing nothing while he's sweating. I know. That incredible. I mean, it's a cliche, but honestly, having performed the piece, and it's taken me millions of years to get it to any kind of standard. I mean, I can't even imagine your situation. I mean, just from starting at naught, and then coming up with what I think people would still say is the gold standard of this performance. It's just, I can't even imagine the daunting task that you faced at that time. I mean, it's amazing. nothing to listen to, trying to put heads and tails together of no bar lines. There was no orchestra score at the beginning. It's all handwritten. I can't even imagine what you face. In fact, I'll ask you, I'll put you on the spot. I mean, do you have any sort of doubts or worries or anything like that? Or
there was not much time to worry, but I remember that in my part, which was handwritten, the copyist wrote in very little print on the back page. He said, "I'll tell you exactly what he said. It was a little comment. He said, 'Dear SD, not enough cues, maybe.'" And then with exclamation point marks, "Good luck."
Oh, that's great.
In fact, Stanley, you brought a couple of really great memorabilia. Why don't you show it to our audience, starting with the score, the handwritten original score, autograph score. Okay, the revised version looks a little different than that. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And show us the other. You brought some other things along.
Well, here's the program from the.
Yeah, phenomenal.
I think we all signed that.
Yeah, wow.
And the
Wow.
date, you can see the dates of the performance. There were.
Wow.
You can see how many original performances there were.
Yeah, amazing. In fact, I'd like to ask you. I mean, that to me is interesting. I mean, to play the piece once,
Yeah.
is 101% energy sapping. To put it on 4 times,
That's
back
right.
to back. Now, I had the experience. I have to do it twice, and for me, the first time, the first run got a little bit away from me, and the second night, I told myself, my heart's racing a little bit. Don't do it too fast. Don't. And I trusted the tempo in my head, took it down on the edge, and it was pretty good the second night. So I wonder, do you remember one of the nights being sort of your favorite nights? And did you actually learn something from night to night?
Well, you wonder which one you're going to like more. But the most exciting was that first performance, because the explosion of audience at the end of it was, I mean, it was incredible. The reviews, I'll tell you, it sounded like the critics were working for me or something. It was a big success, and it was recognized as a work that had great meaning and lasting power.
Yes,
certainly it was probably the most exciting thing I've ever been involved with, and I've played a lot of solo pieces in a lot of venues.
Yeah,
that has to be at the high, certainly the highest of anything I experienced.
Wow.
Amazing for me. Here, this is another picture here from the. Let me get an interview. Do you see it?
Yeah, incredible. After the first concert, was it?
Yes.
Wow, John, how did you feel at that? Can you remember how you felt at this moment?
Totally, you're wildly, I can't even describe it, so full of energy and life that this thing really worked, and that Stanley and Lenny pulled it off. I mean, it was something. I was beside myself.
And was there any part of you? I mean, you have this image of the Broadway show people, waiting for the reviews the next day. As soon as it ended, and I've heard, I mean, it's a legend. It's not just what Stanley says. That first night, it was just like a volcano of applause. Was there part of you that kind of thought 3 seconds before the end, I wonder how it's going to be received?
No, not really. I was living with the piece, and my goal always is the performance. I never really think about what happens after that. I worked so hard to make it, and then the rehearsals We worked so hard to do it. And then that night, it was my entire focus was on Stanley and Lenny and the orchestra and how they were doing. Again, I grew up that. I mean, I listened to when my father played, you know, Tchaikovsky or Brahms or something. I would listen to that solo violin and the orchestra in backstage. And I'm beginning to think I even heard this backstage because I didn't get to really sitting in the audience until about 25 years ago. At the very beginning, in 77, I'm pretty sure I heard it on the speakers, the same way I heard my father play concertos. And it was the same thing. Of course, it was a different hall, but it was the same idea that I can't be in the audience. It's just too much for me. I just have to listen to it distance away. Yeah.
Can I actually ask, obviously this was a huge moment for you, but knowing Stanley, and you were saying you were backstage because you were kind of nervous for your father, was there part of you, as reliable and competent and brilliant as Stanley is, was there part of you that was a little nervous for him at some of the lists?
Just like I was nervous for my father. I was always nervous in these difficult spots. I said, now he's got to do this, and it's coming up. Oh my God, he did it. And now, you know, this, and I would relax when he was in the thing and then tense up for the next difficult thing. It's just my nature. That's the way I listen to a concerto. Now, I don't listen that way to everything, but in concertos, I grew up that way. It's part of how I react. And I was with him all the way, and I was so amazed at the end that it was so spectacular.
Wow. And so it's obvious that you guys have this mythical bond now. Since then, I'm curious about your relationship before. I mean, I know that John took a couple of clarinet lessons with you. I mean, were you at all friendly or very friendly or something in between before this incredible occasion?
Well, you know, we did see each other on some occasions, and John was around the concert hall for certain things, you know, and he was, of course, by this point, you know, everybody knew who he was. He was getting quite famous, and so we would, you know, talk in passing and so forth, but there were no specifics at that time of works or other than what had gone on, and it was just he was just one of the team. Actually, we were all Lenny's boys, you know, in a certain way. You know, it's like Ed Murrow's boys, right?
Fantastic. By the way, it needs to be said, Stanley mentioned on his interview here that, you know, obviously there's a biography of him, and I believe John wrote the foreword to it.
I did, with great pleasure. I did.
Great. So, Stanley, any last words of remembrance or comments or something you want to say to John or to our audience or to me or anything else?
Avoid last words. As possible.
Before I forget, so I want to say this. We had this fantastic interview a few months ago, and we had a kind of a great. I mean, this is you know, I can't even say how much I admire this man, both of you, of course, but Stanley in particular is my childhood hero. And you look at what he's done with his life and where he is now and everything. And I'm going to give you one more crack at it. Last time you copped out, you said you need a lot of luck. I want you to give, especially now we have, you know, all kinds of uncertainties in the world. We have a lot of young people that are looking up to both of you guys, you know, and you've led this unbelievable life. You get one more crack at it, Stanley. Well, last words, advice to young people on life, music, anything you want to do.
Pretty big order, but I think for in the playing the clarinet and wanting to be a clarinetist and one that plays all kinds of music and all over, I say you have to never stop trying to take auditions and try to appear. Never say no. If no matter what the venue is or what the possibilities are, keep playing and keep trying, because it's not a it's not where you learn lines of numbers or facts. You know, it's where, you know, it's judged in a different way. It depends who's listening to you. It could be considered wonderful in the West Coast, and in the East Coast, not so wonderful. So you can't take. You have, if you're young enough, you can take your hits with your successes. I'd say keep at it, because I know people that auditioned in this place just got just not much impression, and they do the same audition in another place, and they're hired. You know, it's hard to know. It's not an exact thing. It's dealing with taste and just a totality. It's not just playing. Everybody can play the same Capriccio Espagnol, you know. But so what do you bring to it? And whoever the listener is very important, because the listener has to know the difference, and not every listener knows the difference. It depends on say it, on luck.
And luck. Fantastic. Just before you go, it needs to be said, a very good friend of mine and yours, Stanley, and someone that John knows, and he's in the John Corigliano clarinet concerto club. Great guy, brilliant artist. Charlie Knight extends all his best wishes to all of us, and you know, he's enjoying this chat very much.
Well, thank you, Charlie. You're one of the good ones, let me tell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful, guys. Thank you so much, John. I'm keeping you busy here, but I hope your wheels are turning, because you know for sure I'm going to ask you the same question at the end of the interview. So anyway, Stanley, thank you so much. You're our first repeat offender on this show. Okay.
I am innocent.
Hey, thank you so much for everything you've brought to the music world, mankind, to this piece, you know, and to the show, actually. So thank you so much, Stanley. Take care.
John. Bravo, John.
Oh, yeah. Bravo you, Stanley, and love to you. Bye.
Take care, Stanley. Okay, John, I remember they used to have a TV show way back in the day. They say, "This is your life." You know, they get your grades. So we've had a fantastic chat about, you know, a standard piece now in our repertoire, and it's been really informative and interesting. But you know, we're still on the subject of writing for the clarinet, and we have another friend, another past guest on the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about your real fantastic masterpiece, that First Symphony. You did it here not too long ago. In fact, our co-host Lorenzo played it as I did, but played this very, very strange part. I mean, he was switching from the contrabass clarinet, and he's not the tallest guy in the world. Sorry, Lorenzo. And he had all these big chairs, and then he had to switch over to E flat. And John Ye, who's a big friend of our orchestra. I mean, he's come and played with us. You know, first question, he goes, "Oh, you're playing with John. Who's playing that part?" You know, and Lorenzo, of course, knows him. And Lorenzo, and John says, "It was written for me." And I said, yeah. And I checked it with you the next day, and it was verified. So we're going to bring on our second very special guest. Welcome, John Ye.
Hey.
Hi, guys. Oh, so great to see you. I've been listening with amazing interest. You guys, I'm learning so much, as I always do when I listen to you, Andy. Hi, John. It's wonderful to see you.
So good to see you.
Since the Music Now retrospective, I guess it was a couple of years ago, when all the Chicago Symphony composers in residence, of which you were the very first, attended a chamber music concert in the Harris Theater. And then a few years before that, they did a screening of the Altered States. And
yes, they did. That was my 70th, 80th birthday. I forget.
It was an amazing experience. I just loved that. And
I
seeing you.
He did such a great job. I was really amazed, because they've done the red violin before, but Altered States, this was a first.
Yeah.
and put together what the trumpet player who's the conductor.
Yes.
Milton?
No. We went to tango with the other.
He's terrific.
I know his name. I'll figure it out and I'll let you know.
Let me know. He was wonderful. He actually made everything work, and I thought the orchestra sounded terrific, and it was great seeing all this.
Great. Great to see that movie again after so many years. 30 years later, it was the 30th anniversary. Yeah. But then when we went to Australia together, we had an amazing time with Schulte in Australia.
I think it was Schulte. Oh,
88. It was the bicentennial of Australia, and they were doing the World Fair, and I remember in Brisbane they were getting the World's Fair already, and the hotel wasn't quite ready yet.
Well, look, this is one of my souvenirs. Let me see if I can get it close to the mic. This black opal.
The opal ring, yeah.
It's a black opal. I got this actually in Brisbane.
Oh, nice.
Just the phone, and then I asked them to make a very simple setting, and I wear it every day.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember walking across the bridge, across the river, and you were walking in the other way. Oh, hey, John, taking in the sights.
Absolutely.
That was a wonderful. We played tournaments. Your tournaments.
Yeah.
Overture with Schulte. He was a huge fan of yours. I mean, he just obviously, I picked you as our composer in residence, and it's because of the clarinet concerto that he became such a huge fan.
John Ye, we have two Johns here, so I'm going to call you by the last name. I'll be terribly formal now. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's do a little bit of a history. So we'll start with how the clarinet concerto, how that led to John's relationship with the orchestra and you, and then I know it's probably just a footnote, but I'm personally very curious about that part and how you had the chutzpah to walk up to the composer and say, look, you write for this instrument and that. And he negotiated. He said, okay, I'll do that under the condition that you're comfortable moving to that. We want to hear all this. So let's get organized. John Ye, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andy. Well, as everybody probably knows, we very shortly after the premiere did the clarinet concerto in Chicago with Larry Combs, a soloist. Larry, we were on tour in New York during the recording session with Zubin, and I remember I still have the recording. Obviously, it's an LP, and I remember being at the recording session and with Zubin and backstage, and it was a very high pressure moment. I remember that.
Not sure was.
But we were on tour, and Larry and I were sitting in the audience, and we were just like agog at this piece. And Larry said, "We've got to do this. I'm going to show it to Schulte." And Schulte, absolutely, he just loved it. You gave us the recording. I still have the cassette, and I'm wearing my cassette shirt. See, probably some of the younger people watching this don't know what that is. But those are cassettes, and I remember, John, you slipping me a cassette of Lenny's and Stanley's performance of your concerto, and Larry gave it to Schulte, and Schulte said, "Wow, this is a really great piece, and I think we should program it." And then he comes back after Christmas vacation, and he kind of grumbles to Larry, and he says, "You know what? You ruined my Christmas vacation." But he said, it's a wonderful piece. And we went on to play it in Chicago. We went on tour and all over the U.S. On it in diverse different halls. Me and Greg up in the gallery, standing up with our high Bs. It was really an amazing experience. And then when they had the composer in residence program, they said to Schulte, "Well, who do you think we should get for a composer in residence?" He didn't have to wait 1 second. He said, "John Corigliano." Because we had such a great success with his clarinet concerto. I know he can work with our orchestra and do great things and make us, right on the cutting edge. And it was just, so that was the genesis of John coming to Chicago for several years and then writing a piece for our orchestra. And in those days, I'm not so, maybe I'm a little bit lazier now, but in those days I was so keen on getting composers to write for the contrabass clarinet. And it was like any composer that came to town that I knew that was going to be commissioned to write for the Chicago Symphony, I'd say, well, you know, it's fun to play the contrabass clarinet, and I think it's got a really great sound, and I think you should write for it. And John said, oh, well, do you think you could play the E flat clarinet part and the contrabass clarinet? I said, yeah, and the third clarinet part. I mean, it was a tripling part.
Right.
I had to have three reeds and 3 mouthpieces ready to go. And on top of that, well, I remember you saying, you know, do you think you can play the top note of the E flat clarinet, because it was in that and it was like it was going crazy, and it ended up on the very top note on the E flat clarinet. And he says, do you think you can switch pretty quickly? And so in 20 seconds I play the highest note of the E flat clarinet, and then I have to put it down and pick up and play the lowest note of the contrabass clarinet.
Wow.
And it was like, oh yeah, sure, you know. And it was very athletic, but very incredibly effective. And so I always say, you know, it pays to kind of go out on a limb and tell composers, yeah, well, we have the capability of doing this here. We can do a contrabass clarinet here. And John was the pioneer. I mean, you know, we had other composers, Takamitsu and Carter and Barrio. They'd always write contrabass clarinet parts because, you know, I'd kind of like give them a little bit of shove, and I said, you know, we can do it here. And so, but I also remember the circumstances behind the premiere.
Yeah.
And Sheldon Skolnick, you know, I mean, our great dear friend Sheldon Skolnick, the pianist, Chicago pianist, who, you know, played your piano concerto a lot and a lot of your chamber music. He was dying of AIDS.
Right.
And so during that time, Schulte was incredibly busy with all sorts of stuff. And he said, you know, let's move the premiere. The premiere was set already. And he said, let's move the premiere like a year later. And I remember, God, I remember, it rips my heart out to think about it. But I remember John saying, no, you know, we can't do that. I mean, John Corigliano saying, no, we can't do that because Sheldon doesn't have long.
Right.
And so Sheldon attended the backstage piano part was his favorite piece, right?
Yes, the Albanese Tango, arranged by Godowsky. And it was really amazing. Stephen Huff, who's a very well-known concert pianist, he called the Chicago Symphony because he was a friend of Shelley's and admired him. And he came to Chicago at his own expense and played the backstage piano as a tribute to Shelley, who was in the audience.
Yes.
Shelley lived through the premiere and died a week after it.
Right.
And in fact, in the pre-concert talk, he wanted me not to talk about the person who I was honoring in the present. But he was sitting in the pre-concert talk 5 rows back and smiling at weighing 75 pounds or something.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this great pianist and playing Shelley's recording of the Albanese Tango. And he was smiling, and I was dying inside because there he was. And he made it to the concert, accepted the dedication, it's to him, and then he died a week after. Because
well, he attended every recording session too.
Yes, he did.
And he came down and listened to every playback. I remember him like hobbling along and just, I mean, he looked like he was 100 years old.
Yes, he
but
did.
He made it to every concert and every recording session.
Well, it was
and next week he was gone.
I know, but he wanted that so much. And he was my dear friend for over 25 years. I mean, you know, he had an apartment in New York. I live in New York. And the apartment on my street, and we got to meet through some musical reason, and we hit it off. And he was one of the funniest people I ever knew.
Incredible wit.
Yeah, when he was diagnosed, I was there actually when he was diagnosed with AIDS, and he had pneumocystis pneumonia. For the first year and a half, he was on AZT, and he was feeling fine. And Shelley had a great way of avoiding things, like learning a piece to a deadline. He would just avoid it to the last minute. And it was a very good technique to use now because he was actually very funny and high-spirited for the year and a half. He would call me up imitating Jimmy Levine or Horowitz, and I would not know who's calling me, because one time Horowitz really called me, and I said, "Please, it's enough," and it was Horowitz. But he had a great sense of humor, and then near the end, he got meningitis, and everything went away, and he had to die, and we all knew this, but he avoided it, which I was not able to do. When I was writing his memorial piece, he would call me up on the phone and be funny, and I would hang up the phone in New York. I was up here in my upstate place. I would hang up the phone and continue writing his piece.
Yeah.
So that was a very, very traumatic time.
Yeah, it was heart-wrenching. I mean, it created a very, very special work for the Chicago Symphony. Our very first piece by our very first composer in residence, and it has such an important meaning because it's based in Chicago. Sheldon. I mean, we performed chamber music a lot together when he was here, and so it's a memorial to Sheldon Skolnick, but also to all the others that were afflicted by AIDS. And then I remember performing it all over Europe, taking it on tour, and then hanging the AIDS quilt all over behind the orchestra when we played it. And it's a very, very special, it's a monumental work in the same way that the Clarinet Concerto is, and as personal as the Clarinet Concerto is.
Yeah. Allow me to say, we did the work, I'm going to guess a year and a half ago, and John came out, and the best thing that Jaap did that week, our music director, he had him come out and he talked to us the way Lenny talked to the orchestra for 50 minutes about the concerto. He made sure John explained all of it to us, and for about 15 minutes, you could hear a pin drop, and I think it had exactly the same kind of effect that Lenny must have had with the New York, and like everyone kind of said, "Okay, let's do this." This is serious business. People were very touched, and then Jaap had him come out, and he basically made the same sort of quote speech or talk to the audience. I think it made such a difference. And then I talked to some friends of mine in the New York Philharmonic. Jaap, of course, is a music director in both orchestras. They had done it just a few months later. And I didn't say a word. And they said, but you know what really made this performance special? John came out and made this speech. So I think when you really hear it from the composer, he's talking about how close he was in the different characteristics of these people who were going through this, or when he did it. I mean, it really, it's very inspirational.
So it's important to know the background and to be able to, properly put your heart and soul into the performance. And I think we really, this was a very, very special time.
Great. And one more tribute to John. It needs to be said for those, well, first of all, for those of you who have not heard the First Symphony, go out and listen to it, especially after listening to these guys. But a credit to John also. It isn't as simple as, oh yeah, I picked up the contrabass and then I picked up the E flat. I mean, he plays one, he slams it down, picks up the other one, and it's a full-on solo, tricky solo. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart,
Well, I have to tell you, I mean, it was courageous for you, John, to write this part the way you did it. But I would venture to say that the majority of performances that are done in other orchestras, they split the part. They get
really,
they get an extra player to come in and play the contrabass clarinet part on its own, so that they don't have to do that. But I mean, kudos to Lorenzo that did the whole part as written, and whoever does it that way. But it was a lot. Some composers will say, no, I don't think I'm going to get enough performances if I write for contrabass clarinet, because it's not really a standard instrument. But I think it's got, as you know, when you do go out on a limb and write for an instrument like that, and so skillfully and so perfectly, it really does make a difference, And so we were happy to be able to bring that to life in that way.
It's not a standard instrument in the orchestra, but in concert bands, it is a standard instrument. So there are many contrabass clarinets all through the United States, because some orchestras have to go to the band and borrow a contrabass clarinet for the symphony.
in those days we had to borrow ours from Northwestern University. Now we have one. But we had, in those days when we were just getting started playing music and we were just getting started lobbying composers to write for it, we didn't even have our own. So we'd borrow it from Northwestern, and now we have our own. But I remember when you came to DePaul, just the opening of the new concert hall, and they did their concert band did your amazing, that incredible antiphonal.
Circus Maximus.
Circus Maximus. Wow. That was something that was just like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
My gosh. John, you got to, I mean, you are definitely an honorary Chicago citizen.
I guess I am. That's a surround. What happened was I loved surround writing, and I did it in the clarinet concerto for the orchestra and for other pieces like the Pied Piper. But the problem with an orchestra is it doesn't rehearse that many days before it plays. And anything where you place people around the hall, the cueing system and how you do what is terribly important and needs time. Sure. So I couldn't do what I really wanted, which was to write a piece that is completely surround sound. But Circus Maximus is. Yeah. You actually have, I think, 14 trumpets, 11 in the first boxes going around instead of the 5 French horns, say. And we have saxophone quartet from that was awesome. A double bass in one corner, and we have 2 French horns on the other side, and we have a solo clarinet here, and percussionist, and then a marching band of 8 players in back of the audience.
Yeah,
and so it can whirl around it. I mean, it's a piece about the destruction of our society because we're being entertained to death, which was the Circus Maximus in ancient Rome. It actually held, I think, 250,000 people a day and ran for almost 1,000 years from the beginning of the Roman Empire to the fall. And when Rome was falling, one of the things that the people in charge depended upon was distracting the Roman public with these games, Circus Maximus. So we are distracted. We're distracted by what we're doing right now, video, in this with television, 500 channels, iPhones. We can't even listen to anything more than 3 minutes without switching to something else to see what it's on. In fact, there's a movement called channel surfing in this, where all the different choirs of all around you play different ideas from different television shows or something, and suddenly are interrupted until it becomes wild and frenetic. And at the very end, after a prayer, when the opening martial fanfares return, the very last note is actually a shotgun blast,
right?
Which we always have difficulty doing in various halls, because some of them won't allow it. But I don't remember what happened in Northwestern. In DePaul.
No, it was in you did it, but that was a very, very loud, resonant hall. But it was incredibly effective, and with all the different musicians swirling around and marching up and down, and the saxophone quartet, so incredibly inventive, and they did it very, very well. And your explanation, it really, really helps to have such eloquent and explanations that are so to the point for the listener to grab onto. That's why your music is so understandable and so for touching, moving to the listener and to the performer, obviously.
Yes. No. Since we mentioned him, and he always deserves a credit. Lorenzo, why don't you join us for a minute?
Wonderful.
Hi.
Lorenzo.
John, thank you so much for being so nice. And John Corigliano, thanks for writing such an amazing piece.
Wonderful.
So Lorenzo, he helps us with all the techie stuff. He makes these fantastic posters. I hope you enjoyed your poster, John and Stanley. Lorenzo, do you have anything to it needs to be said. I mean, you talk about kind of talented. I mean, of course, Lorenzo's a master bass clarinetist, and the contrabass didn't faze me. But he turns to me and says, "Listen, Andy, this might be a fun challenge. do you have an E-flat clarinet you can lend me? I've never played it before. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And after this, he says, listen, I see we're doing Shostakovich 5. Would you mind? Can I play it? And can I, just like that? I mean, just pick it up like it was the recorder. So Lorenzo, what do you, I mean, you have these fantastic musicians. You know them all.
Yeah, first of all, when you play bass clarinet, you can play as loud as you can, but still in the low register. So when I tried the E-flat clarinet, you could make such a loud sound, and especially in Corigliano, you actually have to do it, and you have to play really loud, and you have this beautiful solo. I enjoyed it so much that I asked you, come on, let's do more.
It's great, Lorenzo. I love that.
Okay.
You got to be versatile. I love that. That's awesome. See, John, you gave Lorenzo his first opportunity to play, but that is so amazing.
I'm so happy about that. I'm
great.
And I have to say, and then I will go back to do all the video filming. But I agree for what you have said about Corigliano music. It's really understandable immediately from the first sight, and it's actually great to play. We play a lot of contemporary music, but not often music written not so long time ago. It's so clear, and so it gets you inside. So that's for me what a great music and a great composition is. So thanks again, John Corigliano, and
thank you, Lorenzo.
Great. So
bye.
Thanks. And so, Kanye, we're gonna wind it down. We've had John Corigliano. We did some mini recording interviews for some upcoming concerts. So he's had quite a workout. So we're gonna say goodbye. But thanks for being the second guest within a minute of a return guest to the show. And you're not in such bad company. I'd have to say.
I'm honored to be in the same company as my incredible, legendary heroes, John Corigliano, Stanley Drucker, and you, Andy Simon.
Oh, you're just saying that because it's true. No, I'm just kidding.
It is. You've become an incredible hero for all clarinetists and all musicians now. But by doing Licorice talk, notwithstanding Chef Lynn's comment about too much licorice.
Oh yeah, Jimmy Lynn teases us a little bit, the violence. Anyway, John, thanks so much. And John, I'm still going to take a minute with you, John Corigliano, but it needs to be said, and I've mentioned this several times. Amazingly, this is the 21st episode. Some have gone over 3 hours, including John Ye's. John has listened to every minute in real time. Okay,
that's my Saturday morning activity.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're so happy for your support.
I want to point this out too. The award-winning, the Academy Award-winning soundtrack.
That was nominated. Altered States. What one was the Red Violin? But that was.
Oh, okay. Well, this was nominated, and it was fantastic. I love it because that actually gave me the idea that, oh, well, John is adept at writing for the contrabass clarinet. We can't let this opportunity slip by without getting the contrabass part. So
John Ye, thanks for adding that little colorful thing in our repertoire. So all the best, John, and we'll be in touch soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Bravo.
So
great
good
to see you both.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you, man. Okay, so see, it hasn't been that bad, John. It's been a little walk through memory lane. Not so bad, right? And lots of appreciation. So we're gonna put you on the spot like we did with Mr. Drucker. It's obviously very difficult for composers right now. It's very difficult. It's difficult for musicians. It's difficult for humanity. That included, but. Anyway, whether we're going through all these things or not, here's as John Ye said, a hero to so many people. You've affected so many people's lives. We want to hear what advice are you going to give to young people, not just about COVID, just general life advice career advice, artistic advice, anything you want to say?
Well, the most important thing, if you're a musician, is to be in love with music. And Stanley is the ultimate person of that, because every time he plays, he's so happy. And when he comes off, he says, I just love this piece. I love playing it. You need to love what you do. And if you don't, maybe you shouldn't do it. But you gotta, if you want to compose something, you have to really love the idea. I don't love composing, but I love having composed, because composing is hard. And I struggle a lot. I feel I don't know anything until I get ideas. But I love having composed. I love the fact that out of nothing, and just blank pages with 5 lines on it, I was able to construct something of a real structure, an architecture that exists. Even though it doesn't exist until people play it, it's there. So I really love that. And I think a performer also has to love performing. It's a very tough time for performers. You're playing your instrument, and the best we can do at this point is get on a screen and share your playing. And the same with composers. I teach my composers, Juilliard composers, over Skype. And they're all over. One is in Istanbul, one is in Barcelona, one is in the West Coast, one's here. But one of the things about all of them is how excited they are when they write something, how happy they are, and how full of enthusiasm. I think we have to keep it. It's really a hard thing to keep. Very often people who are in the business for many, many years get jaded. They don't love it anymore. So you have to find a way to get to love it when you're older and maybe not feeling that way. You have to find a way to fall in love with it again, because you will have an audience in time. This will happen. But right now, you have to love the doing, the playing of the instrument, the writing of the piece. And you have to find the best way you can of sharing it. Obviously, right now, composers can probably get works, small chamber works performed, or solo works. Maybe they should write that for a while until something happens. And performers might team up with composers. This is a very nice thing to do, especially with COVID, to be online and showing a composer what you would really want to happen, and the composer really getting excited by that and doing something and sending it to you, and you trying it out and playing it for him or her. This is the life spirit that we have to keep. We have to stay forever young, which is a Bob Dylan line from his song Forever Young, which I, by the way, set 7 Bob Dylan songs, originally for piano and voice, then orchestra and voice, and band and voice. And the reason I love that song is because it said, no matter how old you are, you must always stay forever young, forever young. That's being in love with what you do. That's it. And if you're musicians, music is what you love. So
Great.
Go for it.
Thank you so much, John. On the behalf of the clarinet community, the musical community, the audience community, well, first of all, the clarinet community, thank you so much for adding a true masterwork and standard piece to our repertoire. And second of all, thanks for adding a rite of passage, as I said before. It really is. Wow. If I can play that opening lick, I'm in pretty good shape. It's a great standard. You've contributed so much. And if you and Stanley Drucker aren't examples of lovers of art and staying forever young, I don't know who is. So thanks for being a role model as well, I can say.
Thank you.
So great. So I look forward to seeing you soon and collaborating in the not too distant future.
Yes, with your performance, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Me too. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care, John. Bye.